Hey, greetings, everyone. I'm Doug Cline, and welcome to another edition of Fire and Training. I'm your host, and looking forward to another edition of Fire and Training, talking about some of the deadly sins that we have as firefighters. I'll be flying solo today, talking about this. Looking forward to actually exploring some of these topics. And again, Fire and Training is dedicated to the men and women who serve in the streets 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's to help make sure we're providing them good information and good training. So let's just kick it off. Anytime that we start talking about failures or errors and omissions on a fireground or any type of emergency scene, it comes back to several things. And I kind of put together a list along with several other people that I've actually pulled from of 10 deadly sins, and having a lot of conversations with folks. And the first thing that I want to throw out there is ignoring the size up. In other words, have we really sized the building up? Have we sized the scene up? Are we really looking at it? And size up starts long before the tones ever drop. And if you actually got into, we did a 2-part series, Chris Nam and I did, on size up using Wallace Was Hot as an acronym for structural fire responses that we go to. And again, anytime we fail to assess the scene, anytime we fail to actually read the building, read the smoke, actually look at what's there, the fire conditions, the potential for rescue, means of egress, means of ingress, whatever challenges, anytime we do not look and really take into consideration what we're looking at in the size up, or we ignore what people are telling us on the size up, that's what's so important. Is if you're a second due company or third due company arriving in, listening to what the people are telling you in front of you, and then sizing up again once you get there. Size up is an ongoing process and never goes away. And we should always be looking at the building and looking at the smoke conditions and the fire conditions, being able to predict what's going to happen next, where the fire is going, how it's actually progressing or moving. So anytime we ignore that, that sets us up for a potential failure. And again, we don't need those. And again, I want to say that errors and omissions on firegrounds are very unforgiving. And most of the time when we have some sort of an error or omission, the best we hope for is that somebody just gets hurt. Oftentimes we're dealing with a potential line of duty death. The next part that goes hand in hand with this is, if you're ignoring size up, you're actually not doing a good risk assessment. In other words, just because you walk around a building or do a 360 doesn't mean you got a good size up. Part of what you're doing is assessing risk that's on that scene. And we go into, and of course, Chris Nam and I have done a plethora of series on Taking to the Streets, his show, and on Fire and Training here, talking about building construction, about the components of building construction, how they relate, different types of buildings, different types of construction features to fireground operations. A poor risk assessment is not understanding, what you're really seeing in size up. And it's taking unnecessary risk or misjudging the hazards, not thinking things through. And again, this goes back to the human side, or the human error that we can get into. Again, part of size up is doing risk and doing a risk analysis. And we want to analyze what the risks are on the scene. And that goes back into reading buildings, reading the building construction, the predictability that goes with it, based upon the construction features and design, the engineering principles that are in place, what the fire is doing, because the fire is actually going to behave based upon the compartmentalization in the structure itself. The next thing that comes to my mind is freelancing or tunnel vision. A lot of times we go in and they call it the moth to flame component that exists. We see flames and we go straight towards them. Again, freelancing or tunnel vision are doing things when we're not working in conjunction with the team or in a pair, or operating to where even if we are working by ourselves, it's in conjunction with what command wants, and it's being coordinated with all the other efforts on the scene. Anytime you do act alone, though, there is an inherent risk that goes with that, and that's part of the risk assessment. So the tasks that you're assigned most of the time have been validated and actually walked through that it's safe for you to do those alone. Most of the time, that's been done by an incident commander or a prescribing officer that gives that. Another one that comes into mind is ignoring orders or not following exactly what the incident commander or your officer is saying. In other words, you go off on your own, and that's freelancing. You're not doing exactly what you're supposed to do. The other side of the fence is only focusing on a very small component of what the bigger scope is. That's getting tunnel vision. You may be given a task to go maybe search a second division or a third division. And once you get up there, you're only focused on the small area that you don't get everything accomplished. That again is the tunnel vision that goes with it. Losing situational awareness, not paying attention to your surroundings and really looking at some of these. So freelancing is very simple too, and most people don't think about this. In freelancing, one of the things that comes to my mind specifically with freelancing is you complete a task. As an incident commander, I may send you to the Charlie division to cut off the gas. And then I'm expecting you to tell me the gas is cut off. I'm probably going to give you another assignment or bring you back to a staging area. And then all of a sudden you see something that you think would be cool to do, or it may need to be done, but you don't communicate that. You don't have any communications back to command or to anybody that's working in the area. You act upon it. That's actually freelancing. And what we don't want to have happen is people doing freelancing that is going to contraindicate what we're actually doing or another task that we're doing. A good example is if you decide, oh, I see something on the second division now that I can go up and maybe take care of from an external stairwell, but you don't communicate that. It could be that we have another crew en route to do that. Your freelancing just, took away from the efficiency of the organization. The fact that we don't know you're doing that comes into the fact that, again, the risk assessment's not there. It may be that that's not what we wanted you to do. It may have an impact to the internal components of the operation. So again, just things like that come out. Freelancing is basically doing your own thing without communicating, coordinating, or collaborating with an officer or with the command that's there. And officers actually freelance as well, but this is a bigger scope when you're actually communicating with command. And that kind of leads down to the next piece. That failure to communicate is huge. Not, relaying what you're doing, the critical information, or even listening to others. So if you think about communication in the communications model, there's 5 components. You have to formulate what you're going to communicate or the message. You have to actually articulate that message or send that message some way. It travels through a medium. It's then received, it's interpreted, and then there's feedback. Well, part of what happens is, one, we don't hear communications, or we ignore the communications, or we don't listen to exactly what was said, and we don't, provide that feedback that we truly understand. I have a component in communications to talk about is that we listen to answer rather than listening to understand. In other words, we don't get the full message. So failure to communicate, if you go to the NAJ 5, this is something that comes up all the time in line of duty deaths. Communications was a failure, or there was some failure in communications that resulted in part of the contributing factors to that line of duty death. Another one is failure to get a good size up. So right now we're talking in those top 5 of NOSH, of things that we've looked at or seeing that are right there for line of duty deaths. So again, in communicating, it's important. And part of what we don't do sometimes is if we start seeing things or changing conditions, especially on the interior of the building, we don't communicate those. And a lot of times people just truly ignore those conditions or ignore the changing conditions. And that's the 5th one of those deadly sins. And not adapting or evolving to the behavior that's going on with the fire conditions, or what the building may be telling you, or what the structural involvement has now begun. That's big. That's really big. And I want folks to think about the fact that anytime you ignore something, There's never a good outcome that comes to that. Most of the time, ignoring changing conditions results in near misses or injuries or operations that go south very quickly. Uh, we need to not ignore those changing conditions. What we need to do is acknowledge those changing conditions, but then adapt in whatever way, shape, or fashion we need to be able to operate and to continue the operations and be successful with those operations. And again, ignoring some of these changing conditions uh, is critical. The next one is one that starts from inside the firehouse to out on the fire scenes, the operations, and that's you're failing to actually engage or follow your SOPs. Not adhering to standard operating procedures or poor tactics like uh, ventilation or coordination between fire attack and ventilation, or not catching a hydrant or a plug on the way in, not stretching, hand lines in the right direction, not throwing ladders, whatever your SOPs say, all the way down to if it says that you check your rig every day and you check the water on there and you fail to do so. Now, failing to follow SOPs is, again, it goes back to a poor risk assessment. Uh, Everything that we do has a risk. Following SOPs tend to address those risks. And I kind of chuckle and think about this from a perspective. Most rules or SOPs that have been created in the fire service, are wrapped around a failure or something somebody did. We used to have rules, and we would say this is the Billy Bob rule from where they did something. But again, if we're failing to follow SOPs, and a good example is like properly wearing your PPE. One of the ones, and this is one of my pet peeves that I have, is people not buckling their waist strap on the SCBA. If you actually go to any academy and you look at any of the manufacturer recommendations, you go to a smoke divers course, anytime you got to wear an air pack for any length of time, you're going to want that waist strap cinched and sitting on your hips and not your shoulders, because they're going to be hurting after a very short period of time, especially after having to wear it a long period of time. But those are failures, and failure to follow those SOPs or doing the things that others are expecting you to do. And again, failing to follow SOPs sometimes results in the fact that you're freelancing. And we really don't need people freelancing, on scenes. The other one is we get very complacent. And this is number 7. In getting complacent, we do not check our equipment. We do not check our tools. We don't make sure that they're there. We don't make sure they're in operating condition. We don't make sure they're in good condition. Anytime you do this, and one of the tools that people just sometimes skim through is the SCBA. They don't do a full check of their SCBA every day to include functionality, the past device tests that go on. You test that, you test your SCBA, you make sure that it's working properly, make sure you got plenty of air in there. I see people just kind of breeze through that or skip over that. Well, not checking your equipment, not making sure your turnout gear is ready to go, not making sure the pump operates, not making sure that you have the right equipment on the truck. All those, that's a failure. And again, having failures like that is a poor risk assessment. That goes back to it. Anytime you're not doing what you're supposed to do is that you've not reduced the risks. So we always look at something is the first thing, anytime there's an accident or an injury or things like that, we look at whether or not, first of all, if it's preventable, what could have prevented it? Is it a policy issue? If there's not a policy or the policy is not accurate, then that's an easy fix. Is it an engineering problem? Can we re-engineer it? Can we add safety components to it? Can we add something to make it safer? The third one we look at is the human side. What error was created by a human? And that's where we got to look at how do we fix that, whether it's creating policies that don't exist. That would be a failure of the policy. But most of the time, it's failure of an individual not to follow a policy, not to do a risk assessment, something that is not there. And again, checking equipment, I know happens quite frequently. And that kind of leads me down to the next one, which is complacency, and looking at that routine thinking. Everybody goes, hey, it's a routine operation. It's routine fires. It's our bread and butter operations. Oh, we do this all the time. I get it. I get it that we go and we run multiple fires and we run, some of the same fires, just like being paged here for a motor vehicle crash. Some of that is complacency and a way of thinking. It's just, we've done this a million times. And then we begin to cut corners. And again, cutting corners goes back to that risk assessment component, which is not good. And, again, if we're cutting corners or we're being complacent, then what are we missing? What is the opportunity? And I call this the Russian roulette of emergency services. Every time we cut corners, every time we don't do anything, it's like spinning that um, chamber, on a revolver, spinning that around and with one bullet in there, and is how many times do you get lucky? In the fire service, we have a golden horseshoe. We get lucky quite a bit, but there are times that we don't. And our complacency, I know most of y'all have heard that phrase, complacency kills. So we're at number 8 right now. Part of what I want to go back through is kind of review. First of all, ignoring the size up, doing poor risk assessment, freelancing and tunnel vision, failure to communicate, ignoring changing conditions, failure to follow SOPs, not checking your equipment, and then I gave you complacency, routine, and thinking. Now, starting here is where it comes down to attitude. This is the personal component to it. The first 7 are operational fireground errors. The one we're talking about in 8, 9, and 10 here, starting with complacency, is attitude or preparation errors. And that comes down to the human side. So again, we talked about the complacency of saying, hey, it's just a routine call. It's another call, not a big deal. We've done this how many times? I get it. Now, here's the one that really kicks off, and I talk a lot about it, and I say attitude is everything. Poor attitude is a problem. People having the attitude of, I don't need to train. I don't want to train. Why are we doing that again? Some of those things. It's having a bad mindset. And of course, anytime you start adding that bad mindset to it, you start impacting judgment. You start impacting, your whole thought process, the negativity that come in. You begin neglecting your readiness for response. That comes back to your preparation. Now, this attitude that we're talking about, the complacency and the poor attitude, all now reflect back on why 1 through 7 occur. That's a problem. And if we look at that, all those things we talked about in the operational side is impacted by our complacency and our attitude. Now, here's something that does kick in, and that's lack of rest. And I'm going to open up Pandora's box here, I'm sure. But a lot of times we do run a lot, and we're fatigued. We get fatigued. And I know there's a plethora of different schedules out there, from the 24-48, from the 3-4s, from the 5-8s. In other words, you work a day off a day, work a day off a day. You do that 5 rotations, and then you're off for 8 days. Or the 3-4s, you work a day off a day, work a day off a day, work a day off 4. There's the 24-72s. There's the 48-96s. Anytime that you start getting sleep deprived, we know that has an impact, just like being intoxicated. Being fatigued, being lack of sleep has the same influencing factors of your ability to respond quickly, neurologically, with a focus. So lack of rest. One of the things that you need to do is prepare yourself coming on shift. And I know that I was probably the world's worst for this, so I'm going to cast the first stone and break the first window. But, I'd get off shift and I'd go work, another 12, 14 hours someplace else doing something, whatever it may be in the time period that I was doing, whether it was teaching, whether it was working on an ambulance, whatever. And we did the 3-4 rotation. And then I'd come home, I'd sleep, get up, go back and work another 24 hours. Well, I always work the busier houses, or like to work the busier houses. And we were up, we were busy, we were training, And again, a lot of times you didn't get a lot of sleep. And then you would wash, rinse, and repeat. And you keep doing that. After a period of time, it does catch up. And again, we don't need, somebody having an impaired judgment when we're on emergency scene or taking care of somebody. All those, the complacency, that routine thinking, the bad attitudes, poor attitudes, being tired, impact or operational and fireground factors through 1 through 7. And the last one I'm going to hit on is not being prepared. In other words, I listen, to a lot of programs and listen to people, and functional fitness being one that I love to listen to Dan and those guys talk about in the fitness, and lack of training, lack of fitness, all those things are there. Lack of mental readiness. Um, you know, Chief Kenny talks about taking the cape off, the mental strains that go with you in life, all those things that exist. So not being prepared to be at work or come to work, not having the right training, us, especially company officers, not training their people, not getting their people prepared is a huge factor. So that's kind of the 10 deadly sins of firefighters. I hope that kind of opens your eyes, and you can take this and start having more complex discussions at the kitchen table. And I challenge you to do that at your kitchen table, to start having these conversations and to challenge each other. So again, the 10 deadly sins that we tend to talk about, that's ignoring size up, and the first 7 are operational: poor risk assessment, freelancing, tunnel vision, failure to communicate, ignoring changing conditions, failing to follow SOPs, and not checking your equipment. And then the influencing factors to the first 7, and that are really critical, is when we get to attitude and preparedness, which is 8, 9, and 10. 8 being complacency and routine thinking. 9 being poor attitude, lack of rest, lack of, being ready to come on shift and ready to work. And then the last one's not being prepared, whether you're not trained, whether you're not mentally ready, whether you're not in physical fitness condition that you should be in. All those impact. Again, with these deadly sins, any of these don't go right or go wrong, we begin seeing the potential for errors and omissions, or potentially for having a poor outcome. So I hope this helps. I hope I challenge you enough to sit at the kitchen table and start having some of these conversations and making changes within your companies, within your firehouses. And again, I thank you for joining me for a solo version of Fire and Training. We are dedicated to the men and women in the streets, giving the best information we can so that everyone goes home. Look forward to seeing you on another edition of Fire and Training in the near future.